Good morning, my friends. Yesterday was the fast of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which is a time when we do not study Torah, because since it's a day that there was many catastrophes and lots of persecution to the Jewish people on this day, the highlight of it by the destruction of the temple, both temples, the first temple and the second temple were both destroyed on this day. So since there is very strong power of evil against the Jewish people, so therefore it is customary not to study Torah on this day. So therefore, we did not have the study of the Rambam yesterday, but rather today we're going to be filling in. We're going to start with one class on the chapter of yesterday, and then we'll have another video for the chapter of today. So today we're studying the laws of the foundations of the Torah, chapter 9, in what we are filling in for yesterday. And we're studying about continuing in regards to the laws of prophecy. So we spoke about the specialty of the prophecy of Moses, in where the Rambam tells us that Moses was a very special prophet in the fact that he heard everything very clearly from God, and we have to follow everything that Moses tells us because we know in truth 100% that his prophecy is true, because we saw and we heard from God himself how he spoke to God and how God told Moses to give over the prophecy at the giving of the Torah, when all the millions of Jews were witnesses at that time, listening and seeing and hearing everything that was taking place and seeing it with their own eyes. So therefore we have to believe in Moses being a prophet, and we don't believe in him because he made a certain wonder or a certain miracle, but rather just because we saw it on our own. So today the Rambam continues to say that when we're talking about any prophet, so there is a certain I guess the term would be a certain parameter on where the prophet is able to say prophecy, and certain things that this prophet might say will render him not true, and in fact not being a real prophet from God. As we will see in just a moment, where the Rambam tells us that certain things are just not possible for a prophet from God to be telling us, because God tells us very clearly in the Torah certain parameters and certain things that can never be in a prophecy. So let's get involved and we'll already understand it as we start learning. So we're studying the laws of the foundations of the Torah, chapter 9. Here goes. It is clear and explicit in the Torah that it is God's commandment, remaining forever without change. So the Torah was given by God, and it can never be ever changed. There can never be an addition. There can never be something taken away to diminish anything from the Torah, as it says in the verse, "All these matters which I command you, you shall be careful to perform. You may not add to it or diminish from it." So that's a clear verse in the Torah. It's the Constitution telling us that you can't take away the Constitution. What is revealed, and that continues, there's another verse that says, "What is revealed is for us and our children forever to carry out all the words of this Torah." So this teaches us that we are commanded to fulfill all the Torah's directives forever. So that's something which is always, at any time or any place, always going to be in place. And so, and also it says there's another law that says, there's another verse that says that the Torah is not in the heavens, meaning that if someone comes, a prophet, and he says that he has a prophecy, that there should be a certain change in the Torah. So first of all, we already know the Torah tells us very clearly that we can never change. The Torah can never change. There can never be a mitzvah that should be deleted or a new mitzvah of the Torah that should be added on. And second of all, the Torah tells us that the Torah is not in heaven. The Torah was specifically given down here below into this world. So therefore, a prophet who is supposedly getting prophecy from the heavens, from God, cannot come and change something in the Torah down here below. Because the Torah is down here below, and it is within the boundaries of time and place, and ultimately only the rabbis who understand the Torah and have a very strong base and comprehension of the Torah, they are the ones that can understand when and where, how exactly the law should be, obviously according to the parameters of the Torah, that no mitzvah can ever be added or changed or taken away. But if someone who comes and says that he had a prophecy that it should be changed or taken away, so we will all ultimately know that that is not true. And we will know that this is someone who is a false prophet, and that person who is trying to come and to push away the Jewish people from performing the Torah and the commandments of the Torah. So this person is a false prophet and should be killed. And because he spoke against God and he's trying to mix up and confuse God's words. So God is forever, the Torah is forever, and the Jewish people are forever. So these all have to stay, and they can never be changed. So if so, what does a prophet do? In other words, what is the prophet coming to tell us, if not for a certain thing that's going to happen or a certain commandment to do? In other words, what's this? If the prophet is coming and telling us to do a certain action, isn't that a mitzvah? Isn't that a commandment that he's telling us, go do this thing? So he says like this. Number one, in general, a prophet is going to be someone that will come to strengthen the performance of Torah and mitzvot. So he's going to come and tell us, there are these mitzvot, we need to strengthen ourselves within them in their performance. Or he's just going to be talking about, in regular day-to-day life, things that are not a mitzvah, things that are not a transgression. Not adding a mitzvah, not taking away a mitzvah. Just saying you should go to war, for instance. Or that you should go to this and this place for whatever reason. Or do not go there. So build this, do not build this. All these things are all according to a prophecy that God told him, and we have a mitzvah to listen to him because he's coming in the name of God to tell us what to do. And if we do not listen to him, then that's a very bad thing. That's a sin. So all these things fall within the parameter of what a prophet is able to prophesize about. But if this prophet is saying something, even if it's something which is mundane, but he himself doesn't follow that directive, or he refrains from prophesying, he doesn't actually want to give over what he has heard from God, so then it says that God will seek retribution from him. Or similarly, if this is a prophet that comes and says that certain mitzvot that for a certain amount of time, let's say for a day or a week, under a certain circumstance, we should not follow this mitzvah for X, for whatever reason. So then we actually have a mitzvah to follow him if we know that he's a true. In other words, everything looks like it's real, everything looks like it's good. So then we have a mitzvah to follow him, to listen to that prophecy, because that will still fall into the parameters of the Torah. Because we do have circumstances when the Torah itself tells us that we should not listen to the Torah for a certain amount of time. For instance, let's say if a person is sick, we already learned this. If a person is sick and he is life-threatening, and they have to break Shabbat in order to save that person, so then you are allowed, and it's actually a mitzvah to break Shabbat in order to save their life. So the Torah itself tells us to break Shabbat in order to save them, so that's allowed. So similarly, if a prophet comes along and tells us to do against a certain law for a certain amount of time, so then that would be allowed. We actually have a very interesting story in the Tanakh about this. We have a famous story of Elijah the prophet, who there was in his day, there was a very strong idol, which many people were, not a strong idol, but an idol that had a lot of followers, so to speak, that many people were following and serving. And there were many Jewish people who were starting to serve this idol, and it was gathering a lot of attention. So the leaders of this idol worship, it was called the Baal. So the leaders from the Baal, they came along and they said, the Torah is not true, so on and so forth. This is who we have to follow. This is the true God. And Elijah said, of course, that's not true. God is a real God, and we only have to serve God in heaven. And we're not allowed to serve any idols. So he said, and he had a prophecy. It was Elijah the prophet. He had a prophecy, and he said that we're going to go at a certain time. We're going to go onto Mount Carmel, which is in Israel, or at the outskirts of Israel. I'm not 100% sure. But he went there, and the leaders of the Baal also came there, and they had a contest, so to speak, that each one would bring sacrifices onto an altar that they built on the mountain, and whoever would have the heavenly fire come down onto the mountain, onto their altar of sacrifices, then we would see that they are the truth, and the other one would be false. So Elijah said that we're going to do this. The only problem is that according to Jewish law, you are only allowed to bring a sacrifice within the temple. Once the temple was built, once the temple was in Jerusalem, a sacrifice is not allowed to be brought anywhere else except for in the temple. So the problem is that Elijah is coming and saying, let's go to Mount Carmel, which is far away from Jerusalem, and bring sacrifices over there. So because it was only as a one-time thing, it wasn't as a permanent thing. It wasn't saying, from now on, we're going to be bringing sacrifices also at Mount Carmel. So then we will know that he's a false prophet. But he says that as a one-time thing, we're going to be doing this because of the situation, so then that would be allowed. And that's exactly what happened. And they went there and they brought, each one brought their sacrifices, and obviously the fire only came down onto the altar that Elijah had built, and his sacrifices had the godly fire coming down from heaven, and the ones of the Baal did not, although they tried to do whatever they could, but it did not help. And that was the end of the story, where all the Jewish people saw that Elijah was correct, and all the other idol worshippers were only serving idols made out of stone or whatever. So, similarly, the Rambam continues, if a prophet comes and nullifies a certain concept that was transmitted orally, we have it in tradition of Judaism that it was transmitted all the way down from Moses. So that is also something, if a prophet will come and say that this is something which we don't have to follow anymore, we will also know that he is a false prophet, because as we said, the Torah is not in heaven, and since it is down here below in this world, whatever we have in tradition we have to follow, and that's where tradition kicks in, my friends. Tradition is so important in Judaism, and that's why we have to make sure that every detail of a tradition, even just a tradition of a custom, which is not necessarily a law, has a very strong weight in Judaism. But that is a little bit beyond the scope of this discussion. But again, if it's only for a certain amount of time, for a limited situation, so then that would be allowed. When does all of the above mentioned apply? All in regard to all the mitzvot of the Torah except for idol worship. If a prophet comes along and says that God commanded us that for a certain amount of time, for today, for this week, we are supposed to be serving another God, we will know automatically that he is lying. Because the Torah clearly says that if there is someone who comes, and even though he might make many miracles, and he might make many wonders, and he might really seem legit, but he has spoken against God, then we will know that he is lying. And that is a false prophet, because he is coming to nullify, and he is trying to deny the prophecy which Moses has given us at Mount Sinai, that we have to believe in God. And if he is coming to try to take that away, even for any amount of time, that is something that is definitely not true, and God has not commanded that prophet to say this prophecy, but rather he is making these wonders because of sorcery and magic, and therefore that is going to be counted as a false prophet, and we do to him what a false prophet gets, which is to be killed. So that is the chapter of today. Continuing along with the laws of the prophecy, what is considered a true prophecy, what would be a non-true prophecy, so on and so forth. And we're going to, this was the Rambam for yesterday, for Tisha B'Av, for the 9th of Av, which we didn't learn yesterday because it was a time of mourning, but we're going to continue with very soon with the next chapter, which we're going to be learning for today, and we will continue learning about the laws of prophecy and exactly how that all works. So, all the best for now. We will be in touch.